So I had to get babies in here somewhere. So, Lord, when did we see you hungry and not feed you, naked and not clothe you? Keep those words in mind. One of the things that is really important to me when thinking about our responsibility to others is an awareness of how far-reaching that topic is. It depends on so much, right? It depends on one's age, one's physical capacity to serve, maybe even one's economic status, where one lives, one's work responsibilities, family responsibilities, community responsibilities. But what we all have in common is that we all do indeed have a responsibility to serve others. Another factor is our creativity. Think of so many creative people that you may know who have done amazing things that serve other people. I recently heard about the NAP ministry, N-A-P ministry, and I haven't been able to look much up about it, but if it involves taking naps, I'm all for it, and would like to participate in that. Included in the church's teaching about our responsibility to others is the teaching about the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. The works of mercy, of course, come from the teachings of Jesus. And they give us a model for how we should all treat others as if they were Christ in disguise. And that's not always easy, is it? We can't always treat ourselves as though we're Christ in disguise, and so it's difficult to treat others. The works of mercy are charitable actions by which we help our neighbors in need. That's simply what they are, charitable actions by which we help our neighbors in need. They respond to the basic needs of humanity as we journey together through this life. So things like feeding the hungry, visiting those in prison, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, providing care for those who have been in prison, as Alicia spoke so well about, burying the dead, giving assistance to the poor. Those are all the works of mercy, and those are all things that all of us do. But our responsibility to others also includes our responsibility to know what we're talking about. I learned when I was a student at Thomas More, when I was at St. Elizabeth in a clinical rotation, and I didn't know if my patient's abnormal heart rate was due to a low potassium or a low calcium. And I just had to say to my professor, I don't know. And she said, well, I'm glad you didn't bluff your way through it, and go look it up, and we're going to talk about this in an hour. But I learned early on that we really need to know what we're talking about. And it's particularly important for me in the work that I do, because if I make wrong decisions about the care of a mom or a baby, it can have really serious implications. So I have found, particularly in my work that involves working a lot with immigrants, that I need to learn what I'm talking about. For me, in many ways, that endeavor or that diving into what it means to be an immigrant in this country began when I was studying for my doctorate at the University of Kentucky and decided to focus my research on that. So, this slide is our students whom I accompanied at the US-Mexico border last week for a mission trip. And the top picture is the students serving lunch at a refugee center where we help out when we go. The bottom picture is us in a food pantry. And remember those words from Matthew that I started with. So you might recognize some of the people in this slide. One who most of you will not recognize is my beautiful mom, who is pictured on your left, Mary Emmeline Presser Kremer. My mom was my first teacher about service. Even as she took care of our family, helped my dad run our grocery store, she was always doing things for others. For my mom, service was just a way of life. It was just a part of who she was. And some of you knew my mom and probably remember that about her. Mom was always, if someone died or if someone was sick, mom's go-to was pot roast with vegetables, Jell-O salad, and brownies. And I knew when I came home from school or came home and Mom was working on pot roast vegetables, Jello salad, and brownies, that somebody had died or somebody was sick and Mom was taking food. Other models of service for me, Dolly and Oprah. I think my mom would be chuckling that she was on a slide with Dolly and Oprah. But Dolly with her imagination library, which impacts so many children, including children in our community. And then Oprah with her Angel Network, in which she runs schools in, I think, 13 countries now. And, both of those women could just be sitting back enjoying, their world of the entertainment industry and their millions of dollars that they've made. And instead, they are both really committed to service. My goal when I graduated from Bishop Brossard High School was to move to Nashville with my guitar. And so I've often thought that maybe Dolly and I would have collaborated, or maybe Oprah would have interviewed me. But my parents did not think that was a good idea and told me I had to go to college. So my other plan then was to go to Thomas More and study nursing and become a Sister of Divine Providence, so you can tell which of those things actually happened. And then finally, my forever teachers, my religious community, the Sisters of Divine Providence, several of whom are here today, along with some of our very dedicated co-workers who serve us so faithfully. And really each day I learn from my community about service, faith, commitment, and hope, and most of all about trusting in God's providence. They share with me our life of infinite possibilities for loving God and serving God's people. And I also especially too want to give tribute to our Benedictine sisters and our Sisters of Notre Dame. As President Chillo mentioned, without our three religious communities, this university would not be here. And without another congregation of sisters, the Franciscan Sisters of the Poor, St. Elizabeth would not be here. So two institutions that have been extremely formative and important in my own life really owe their entire existence to religious sisters. I just returned late Sunday night from a mission trip with some of our junior nursing students. We do this trip each year to the Texas-Mexico border. Another group of our students goes to El Paso, the far other side of Texas, with Dr. James Camp from our sociology department. Our group goes to the Brownsville area. So if you can think about El Paso at one end of Texas and Brownsville at the other end. So each year before we go on these trips, when the students are meeting, they asked James or me, are we going to meet up with the other group? And we always say no, because they'd have to drive for 6 hours and we'd have to drive for 6 hours, and we'd be in the middle of very rural Texas, and no, so we're not going to meet up. So that's how big that state is. We stay at Holy Family Birth Center, which is a place where I actually worked for about a year when I was newer in my community. And we also work at the Humanitarian Respite Center, which is run by Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Brownsville, where newly arrived immigrants who have presented to the United States seeking asylum are given food and shelter and assistance. An asylum seeker, as you may know, is a person who has left their country and is seeking protection from persecution and serious human rights violations in their own country, but who hasn't been legally recognized as a refugee. We do have some people who are in our community now who have been legally recognized as refugees. For example, people from Afghanistan can come into the United States now with refugee status. Seeking asylum is a human right. Seeking asylum is a human right. So we need to keep that in mind. That comes from the International Declaration on Human Rights, and it is certainly what the church teaches. So for me, talking about service, particularly having just been on the border so recently, I really can't talk about service without talking about immigration. Much of my work at St. Elizabeth for these last 23 years has been with immigrants, and it is a true privilege to accompany them with their childbirth experiences. And I have been very fortunate to be able to learn to speak Spanish And so that gives me another entree into the lives of so many of our patients. I tell you this with her permission. Kimberly, one of our students, who is the second from your left, has her purse kind of across her black purse. Kimberly's parents swam across the Rio Grande River to come to the United States. Kimberly is a junior in our nursing program, will be a phenomenal nurse. Hopefully she's going to work at St. Elizabeth. She has a part-time job at St. Elizabeth now. But Kimberly is one of many children of immigrants who entered this country without documentation, who are now working at St. Elizabeth. Is anybody from St. E's here? I haven't. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, all right. So you all can testify to this. We probably would not have a housekeeping department if it weren't for immigrants. One of the immigrants who cleans our labor and delivery, I always think you could eat mashed potatoes with gravy on the floor after she cleans a room. They're so hardworking and so dedicated. And so keep all of those people in mind too as we go through this presentation. Our experience on the border flows from Thomas More's commitment to helping our students recognize and live out their responsibility to others. And that commitment flows from Catholic social teaching. So as part of my understanding about our responsibility to others, I've needed to learn more about Catholic social teaching. So I want to spend some time talking about that, as well as talking about misinformation about the border, and then at the end talk a bit more about our mission trip. I have now, besides spending a year at the border when I was much younger, I've had 11 trips to the border, either to El Paso, to Annunciation House, where Dr. James Camp is the chair of the board, or to the lower Rio Grande Valley, where I was last week. So I think I have some credibility when it comes to talking about the border, and certainly my firsthand experiences there have taught me a lot. So Catholic social teaching is an area of Catholic doctrine which is concerned with human dignity and the promotion of the common good in society. So the church is teaching about life, about the sanctity of life, from conception to natural death, flows from Catholic social teaching and is part of Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching is based on and inseparable from our belief in the dignity of all human life. The dignity of all human life. Every human being is created in the image of God, and every human being is redeemed by Jesus Christ, no matter what they've done. Every person has inherent dignity and a right to life consistent with that dignity. So Catholic social teaching doesn't say anything about where a person is from, the language they speak, their religion, their race, their economic status. Catholic social teaching is entirely focused on human dignity. Included in the entirety of Catholic social teaching are about 15 papal encyclicals. And an encyclical is simply a letter written by a pope to the church and to the people of God about a particular topic. The first of those was written in 1891, Rerum Novarum. And the most recent, which is near and dear to my heart, Laudato Si, written by Pope Francis in 2015, which is about caring for our common home, caring for the earth. Catholic social teaching has been called the Church's best kept secret, and indeed it is, unfortunately. And there are even books that have been written about Catholic social teaching, calling it our best kept secret. I had colleagues here at Thomas More who said to me, I don't really know that I've ever heard about Catholic social teaching. And these are really well-educated people who are really committed to the faith, and they haven't heard of it. So it's unfortunate that we, the church, haven't done a better job at making Catholic social teaching known. From the beginning of time, God's call to justice has been very clear, right? It's been very clear. Even if we look at the Old Testament, the law and the prophets preserved a deep tradition of social justice in ancient Israel. That's why it's so devastatingly sad about what's happening in Israel and Gaza right now, isn't it? And then Jesus himself proclaimed and embodied a society ruled by justice and charity. And he called that the reign of God. He called that the reign of God, and he invited all of us into that. So for over 130 years, the church has contributed to this tradition of Catholic social teaching in papal and encyclical writings, and in the social teaching, and in the lives of holy men and women who have lived that out. And one of those people is Sister Norma Pimentel. Her religious order is the Missionaries of Jesus. Sister Norma is Director of Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Brownsville. She's considered one of the major moral and prophetic voices of our time in American Catholicism. Pope Francis a few years ago called Sister Norma his favorite sister. And she was named one of Time Magazine's most influential people in America in 2020. And our group, when we were at the border, our first weekend there, when we went to Mass on Sunday, Sister Norma was at Mass at the church where we went. And so I have met Sister Norma before and was able to visit with her for a few minutes. And she asked if our group was going to the respite center that week. And I said, yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. She said, oh, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be at a meeting. And found out from Sister Marla this morning that they were both at the same meeting in St. Louis. So Sister Norma really, really lives out Catholic social teaching. And she is an expert on immigration, an expert on immigration. People can argue and disagree with her, but her knowledge is based on facts. So there are three themes of Catholic social teaching which I have really tried to learn more about and tried to see reflected in the work that I do. And these teachings are really what shape the church's beliefs about immigration. I want to thank my friend Caitlin Shaughnessy Dwyer, who's not here today, but Caitlin is in our theology department here at Thomas More. And she has really helped me grow in my understanding of how Catholic social teaching relates to immigration. So the first principle of Catholic social teaching related to immigration is the life and dignity of the human person. As I said before, all people are created in the image and likeness of God. Scripture tells us repeatedly that God loves us. God loves us no matter what we have done. God loves us. And we are called to see every person through God's eyes and to love them because God loved them and us first. So this theme also encourages us in raising awareness and praying for all who have been forced to leave their homes, many of whom are victims of human trafficking, violence, and hunger. Once upon a time, I think I was probably a naive girl from Melbourne, Kentucky. No longer am I'm still a girl from Melbourne, Kentucky, but no longer am I naive. The stories that I have heard from people are the saddest things I've ever heard. And when you work in healthcare, you deal with sadness a lot. I deal with joy and beauty a lot because of being a midwife, but I deal with sadness and pain a lot. But the stories that I have heard from immigrants blow me away. And I still remember the very first time I was able to have a true conversation with an immigrant was 20 years ago at St. Elizabeth. And I was at the point where my ability to speak Spanish was good enough that I could really carry on a conversation. And she told me about she and her husband's decision to come here. So you may or may not know that a dark period in our history in the United States is that we trained soldiers from Central America at Fort Bennings, Georgia, to commit guerrilla warfare against their own citizens. So particularly in Guatemala, the Guatemalan government tried to wipe out the indigenous population. The indigenous are the Mayan people. So we always know at St. Elizabeth when one of our indigenous Guatemalan patients comes in. They're on the tallest is about 5 feet tall. They have beautiful, thick, dark black hair down to their waist. And they have kind of very distinct facial features. So this particular patient was telling me about the decision that she and her husband had to make to leave their home in the mountains of Guatemala. And she said that they were living already in the home with her parents, so it wasn't going to be so disruptive for the children. But she said when she put the children to bed that night, their faces and sheets were wet with my tears. She cried so much over her children. And then she kissed them goodbye, and she and her husband set off to walk 10 miles to a town where they could get a bus. The bus took them into to the border of Guatemala and Mexico. That border is, in many instances, even more dangerous than crossing our border. And she said every step that she took, her simple prayer was, God, please protect us. We're doing this for our children. Please protect us. We're doing this for our children. So when I first started working with immigrants and I was sharing with my mom about it, my mom said, help me understand, why are they coming here? And I said, I should say, so said the daughter, the descendant of very poor Scotch, Irish, Welsh people who settled in Boone County and Union County, Kentucky in the late 1800s. And so said the wife of my dad, mom's husband, who was the descendant of poor German immigrants who settled in Campbell County in 1840. Why are they coming here? Mom, why did your ancestors come here? Why did the Kremers and Neltners come here? And if you and Dad would have not been able to take care of us when we were little, if it was dangerous, if you couldn't get jobs to provide food for us and to provide medicine for us, and if you knew that there were no real opportunities in our area, would you have gone to Canada so that you could have taken care of us? And my mom said, in a minute. And I said, okay. That's all they're doing. We are their Canada. And so that began my mom's commitment to learning more. And I am so proud of her that my mom, in her own gentle and quiet way, really became an advocate for immigrants and really encouraged people to grow in their understanding about immigration. So I think that we as the church then have a special responsibility to know what we're talking about. Remember I said earlier about my lesson when I was a nursing student here, not knowing if potassium or calcium led to an irregular heartbeat. Well, we need to know what we're talking about when it comes to immigration, because people's lives can be hugely impacted by misinformation. Just like me making a mistake professionally could hugely impact someone's life, so could misinformation hugely impact the lives of our immigrant brothers and sisters. So this theme also encompasses the church's teaching on solidarity, which means we are one human family. We are one human family. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers. And this teaching also includes the church's teaching on the preferential option for the poor, which is another church teaching that is not always so well known. But what that means is that when decisions are made, how the poor are going to be impacted by that decision needs to be kept at the forefront of decisions that we make. It doesn't always happen that way, does it? There are so many decisions that are made that harm the lives of the poor, but the church teaches that we have a preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. So a basic moral test for us is how our most vulnerable members are faring. The second principle of Catholic social teaching related to immigration is that a country has the right to regulate its borders and to control immigration. A country has a right to do that. So I have family members who vociferously disagree with me about this topic. Pat knows who some of them are. And yet we continue to have these discussions, and I'm glad that we continue to have the discussions. But I absolutely believe this to be true. And sometimes when I tell them that, they're like, oh, okay, so then we do agree about something. But the overriding principle in Catholic social teaching is that individuals must make economic, political, and social decisions not out of short-sighted self-interest, but with regard for the common good. Okay, so go back to my mom saying that absolutely, she and Dad would have moved to Canada if that would be the only way that they could have been able to take care of us. So a moral person cannot consider only what is good for his or her own self and family, but must act with the good of all people as his or her guiding principle. Individuals have the right to move in search of a safe and humane life. Individuals have that right. But no country is bound to accept all those who wish to resettle there. So by this principle, the church recognizes that most immigration is ultimately not something to celebrate, right? If we could all, I don't think anyone in here, at least for me looking around, I don't think anybody is Native American. Some of us may have some of that in our background, but I would suspect that for the most part, most of our families came to the United States either of their own volition or were forced to move to the United States from Europe or Africa. So we know that most immigration is not something to celebrate. If we could go back in time to talk to our ancestors, what stories would we hear of how horrific or how very difficult life was for them? They didn't want to come here, right? They didn't come here thinking, I'm going to get a job and have a lot of money and, you know, in today's world, build a 5-bedroom house in Edgewood and have a swimming pool in the backyard. That's not what their goal is. So they migrate because they're desperate, and the opportunity for a safe and secure life does not exist in their own land. And again, I could tell you story after story after story. We all say we could write a book, right? We all say, oh, I could write a book about fill in the blank topic. I could write a book about the stories I've heard. Immigrants and refugees endure many hardships and often long for the homes they have left behind. So many of the spirituals that come from the African diaspora in the United States are about that longing for a homeland. Many of the Irish folk songs that have been passed down talk about longing for their homeland. So as Americans, we should cherish and celebrate the contributions of immigrants and their cultures. However, at the same time, would it be possible for us to help make life such that it was unnecessary for people to even leave their own land? Because there seems to be no end to war and poverty and misery in this world, developed nations will continue to experience pressure from many peoples who desire to resettle in their lands. A few weeks ago when I was on a call with the other sisters who are on our international leadership team, one of the sisters mentioned that a truck was leaving from our mother house to go to Calais, France, which is where people are waiting to cross the channel into England. They were sending a truck loaded with supplies for people who were waiting there. So, you know, it's not just us. We are not the only ones experiencing. Almost every night on the news, there is a clip about people who drowned in the Mediterranean crossing. And who would do that? Who would do that unless you were leaving behind desperation? I was so proud of the students last week for coming to that awareness when we didn't actually go all the way into Mexico, but we walked across a bridge from Progreso, Texas into Nuevo Progreso, Mexico, and there are Ukrainians camping on that bridge, awaiting their turn to apply for asylum to come in the United States. What we were told at that particular border crossing is that 10 Ukrainians are taken in per day. We'll see a picture of that in a minute. So that picture is the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, where I had the great privilege of hiking 500 miles in 2022. And many of the immigrants who come into our country, particularly if they're coming from South America, they are walking 2,000 or 3,000 miles, right? We walk for enjoyment, we walk for pleasure, good health. They are walking out of desperation. Again, nobody's going to undertake that journey unless what they're leaving behind is catastrophic. So it's important that we not view the work of the federal government and its immigration control as negative or evil. Those who work to enforce our nation's immigration laws often do so out of a sense of loyalty to the common good and compassion for poor people seeking a better life. Again, in an ideal world, there would be no need for immigration control. So the third principle, a country must regulate its borders with justice and mercy. This is the bridge that we took, and I was amazed that Practice Random Acts of Kindness was on that bridge. That was like, what in the world? But it was really cool to see that. So I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to jump ahead here. It's the position of the Catholic Church that pastoral, educational, medical, and social services provided by the church are never conditioned on a person's legal status. Never conditioned on a person's legal status. So all persons are invited to participate in our parishes and attend our schools, etc. So this is population change in our country. This data is reported by everyone who studies demographics. So you can look up any demographer or any economist who's projecting. And economists project that we need immigrants to be our workforce. So we need to welcome immigrant children into our schools. We need to bring them into our culture. We need to help them learn English and be able to participate in life in the United States. And if you dispute this, ask anybody who works in maternity in any hospital in our area. On any given day at St. Elizabeth, half of the people giving birth in our labor and delivery are immigrants. So the birth rate, fertility rate is falling off for the non-immigrant population. It's immigrants who are having children. So there's inaccurate information about crime, and everyone who studies crime will tell you that the information is absolutely false. Research confirms that saying that all immigrants are criminals is a myth. It would be the same as saying all nurses steal narcotics from the unit at their hospital or their place of work. And there is a recently published book called Streets of Gold, America's Untold Story of Immigrant Success, which also elaborates more on that it is a myth that immigrants commit crimes. So these are some really good resources if you want to learn more about immigration and learn more than what's in the common rhetoric that's often reported in our news. So what we hope to do, of course, is transform the world, right? We want to love people enough that the world is transformed. This is our students again at Holy Family Birth Center the morning before we left. If you want to know anything about the Dallas airport, we are now experts on it because we spent about 24 hours there trying to get home, along with a lot of other people from northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. But the Dallas airport is the size of Manhattan Island if you take out the water. So we saw most of it. So again, remember Matthew 25 that I started with. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That picture is at South Padre Island. I always take the students there. I always tell them we get to do one kind of spring break thing while we're on our mission trip. So we spend about an afternoon and early evening at South Padre Island, and we got to see this beautiful sunset. So again, part of our responsibility to others is to know what we're talking about. And I try never to speak publicly about something that I don't know much about. And so I hope that all of you, particularly as this topic of immigration becomes much more important coming up to an election this fall, that you will be committed to the truth, and you will be committed to knowledge, and you will be committed to learning. That is a way that we can live out our responsibility to others. Thank you.